Let me talk a bit about one of the topics that has come up in a lot of the presentations, in all of the presentations, which is the Brotherhood. But I'm just going to limit my focus on the West, on Europe and North America, which is one of my passions. And I think we're going to go, I think we don't need, a lot of people touched upon it. What is the Muslim Brotherhood in the West? I think the term Muslim Brotherhood can mean a lot of things. It's often used in many different ways. I think there's probably a way to put it in a global sense. There's 7 ways, but I think I sort of counted it in a new book coming out. And because it is something that is very important from a terminological point of view to understand what we mean Muslim Brotherhood. In a Western setting, for example, it's not uncommon for people to accuse somebody of being a Muslim brother, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then to get sued. Lawsuits are a very common tactic in this field, and it's important to be cautious with the language, the terminology. In the Middle East, outside of the West, Muslim Brotherhood can identify different things. Muslim Brotherhood is obviously the group that Hassan al-Banna created in 1928 and that existed in Egypt. That is how a lot of people will say the Muslim Brotherhood, they will think correctly about Egypt. Now, but we know that exists Muslim Brotherhood branches pretty much in every Muslim majority country. And they often take different names, as Islamic Action Front, as Al-Nahda, Islah in Yemen, different names, but they are the Muslim Brotherhood in those countries. They are independent. They operate with coordination among themselves and with the Egyptian mother group with which they coordinate. Of course, at times it ebbs and flows, but that relationship based also on the fortunes or misfortunes of the Egyptian mother group. But that's a second way of talking about Muslim Brotherhood. There's a global Muslim Brotherhood. And I see it, so who walked out, great, during my talk, but is Yudi Rosen is somebody who has written a lot about it. This transnational network that exists of activists that operate in all continents and constitute sort of an informal movement that is correctly referred to as the Global Muslim Brotherhood. And fourthly, the Brotherhood is an idea, a modus operandi, a methodology of activism. So people who are not members per se of what is a very formalized, very structured, very hierarchical organizations, even people who are not part of that, but use the tactics, the language, have the vision of the Muslim Brotherhood, can be seen as being Muslim brothers in a very broad sense. That is just outside of the West. What does it mean in the West? I would say there's 3 ways that one can interpret Muslim Brotherhood in the West. Again, going from the smaller to the larger. It is a secret, non-public organization. I sometimes don't like to say secret because it evokes some conspiratorial images, but it is. It is. The reality is that it operates as a structure that replicates, in all Western countries, with a structure that replicates that of the mother group in Egypt. It is a history that has been somewhat described in the earlier presentations of immigration from different countries. I would argue that those who are sort of the people who created the Brotherhood in the West didn't necessarily come to the West to Islamize the West. They came because they were fleeing persecution in their countries of origin. They came as students. It was something that happened, but once in the West, they did create structures that mirrored the formalities, the structure, the ideology, of course, of the Brotherhood in the East. So I think it's fair to talk about a German branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, a French brand of the Muslim Brotherhood, a Canadian brand of the Muslim Brotherhood, a Danish brand of the Muslim Brotherhood, and so on and so forth, which are, of course, very tiny. In a country like Denmark, it would be around 100 people who belong to that network. But it does mirror on a much smaller scale what we see in Egypt and in Arab and Muslim majority countries. Now, that is the narrow sense of Muslim Brotherhood. Those are the people that one could call Muslim Brotherhood openly without getting sued, as long as you have evidence that they are part of this network, they have sworn bayat, allegiance to the organization, something that is, of course, very difficult to do, because those who belong to this core group will deny that they belong to this core group and that this organization does, this structure does exist. Shameless plug to my own work. I have a new book coming out in a few months where I interviewed around a dozen former members of the Muslim Brotherhood in the West, and I spent days and days with some of these individuals. And these are people who were part of this milieu for, in some cases, 20, 30 years, and left. And all of them, whether they were in Sweden, in Canada, in Spain, in Austria, they described a structure that was identical. Formalities that range from the amount of your salary you pay to the organization, to the curriculum that is read every Friday night at the meeting of the USRA, to the time where that meeting takes place, whether it's in Stockholm or in Montreal or in Vienna, that are identical. And that is very interesting. Now, a second way of interpreting Muslim Brotherhood would be organizations that are created by people who belong to this first category. There is sort of a bifurcation where there's a secret structure and a public structure that somewhat mirrors the secret ones, but it's the face that the group wants to see. So organizations like some of those that have been mentioned earlier, generally they have very broad names from the organization of Danish Muslims, of Swedish Muslims, and then of course this hyper tendency to create as many organizations as possible. The joke was 5 Muslim Brotherhood members in a room are going to create 15 organizations, and we're going to be on the board of another 20, because they will create specialization is one of their tactics, which Hassan al-Banna theorized very well. Al-Banna might not have been the greatest theologian, but he was a very, very good organizer, and understood the importance of all these organizations, none of which will call themselves Muslim Brotherhood. They will vehemently deny links to the Brotherhood, or sometimes would admit some historical links, but argue they are independent, they have moved on. And to some degree, they are right. They're not the Muslim Brotherhood. So a group like the Organization of Danish Muslims, created and run by people who are members of the Muslim Brotherhood, is not the Brotherhood, technically. It doesn't pick up the phone and get orders from Cairo on a daily basis. It is independent. It works within, I'm using Denmark just because Magnus enjoys it. Or it could be any country. Well, but you're adopted Danish, so I'll, offended you? No. It is independent. It works in Denmark, and it will work on goals that are very Danish, that have to do with the environment in which they operate. With, of course, always an understanding of being part of a global family, and always coordinating their activities, their fundraising, their messaging with other branches, which would be the Swedish, the German, but also the Egyptian, the Jordanian, the Yemeni, and so on and so forth. Finally, there's a third category, so there's a dilution of what it means brotherhood from the really core to the organizations that are not, to other organizations that might have historical, organizational, financial, ideological ties to the really core brotherhood. There's a brotherhood presence there. Are they brotherhood? Are they not? It's in the eye of the beholder. It really gets diluted and complicated, and sometimes from a legal point of view, very challenging. Now, what are the aims? What is the ideology of this movement? I think there's a general framework which is common to all of them, whether they are in Egypt, in Yemen, or in Denmark and Canada, which is seeing Islam as a complete system, encompassing all aspects of private and public life. But the Brotherhood is an extremely pragmatic movement. It is fully aware of what it can achieve, how the environment in which it operates is, where it can push and where it cannot. Of course, they miscalculate, Egypt being a wonderful example of that. They're not, almighty and all-knowing. They make mistakes like everybody else, but they analyze. They're very flexible and very fluid in their ideology, and understand, for example, that while they might want to push for an Islamic state in the Middle East, that makes little sense, if not as a lofty aspiration for a distant future, in the West. So in the West, they will push for what the specific environment allows them. In a staunchly secular country like France, they will be somewhat timid on certain issues. In a country, and they will never ask, for example, for Sharia courts. That would be even the most open-minded Frenchman, Frenchwoman would be appalled by a request like that. In a country like the UK, where there are state-sanctioned Sharia courts, the Brotherhood would be, of course, strongly demanding more Sharia courts. So they know the system. They've been working in different countries for a long time, and they know, again, with sometimes mistakes, what to push for. I would say there are 3 main goals. The first one is to guide Muslim communities, diaspora communities in Europe, in the West, make their interpretation of Islam the mainstream one. With mixed success. We can talk, it's a broader point, whether they're successful or not at it. They definitely punch above their weight. We're talking about very small groups, very small number of people who belong to this network. So they definitely punch above their weight. But whether they are controlling the communities, I think that's my short answer would be no. The second goal, very much tied to the first one, is to become the official or de facto gatekeepers, representatives of this fictional homogeneous Muslim community. They claim it exists, ignoring, of course, the diversity that exists in Muslim communities in the West. But the idea is that they want to be recognized by governments, by elites, by the CNN producers who call for the Muslim voice, by anybody who wants to do interfaith dialogue, from whoever, to be the voices of the Muslim community. And that, of course, that is a position that they aspire to have in reality, but they kind of portray themselves as being the representatives of the Muslim community in order to become it. Finally, they want to do what any lobbying influence group would do, which is to influence domestic and or foreign policy. Use their position of proximity, of coziness to Western elites to influence them on their decisions. So when policymakers want the pulse of the Muslim community, again, assuming there is such a thing as a homogeneous Muslim voice, reflexively, mostly out of laziness, the voices they will reach out to will be these individuals who belong, for the most part, to this group of self-appointed speakers for the community. Well, I'll go very briefly about the method and tactics, because then I have long quotes that I would like to read. The tactics, as I said, are very, very fluid. They participate in politics and civil society at all levels. They will be extremely excited in participating in PTA meeting at the local school and vote on the most mundane issues at the local city council just to exert influence. But of course, they love interacting at the highest level of politics. They see all of it as useful to the cause. They're very flexible in their alliances. I still marvel at times at their ability to have in the morning an event with an LGBT group and in the afternoon hosting one of the most conservative Salafi speaker. It's really not a problem for some of these groups to do so, because both of these groups advance the group's cause in different ways, of course. And of course, they have as I said, great organizers, have very good capabilities. They tend to be, of course, come from very good educational background. Comparatively, compared to most other Muslim organizations, they know societies in which they operate much better, and they can rely on ample funding. That ample, and that, of course, the resources, the money, that's a core aspect. Now, some of that money is self-generated. They're good businessmen, a lot of them. They they have a internal system of fundraising. They raise funds within the community, through zakat, through charity. But the reality is what set them really apart is the funding that has come historically from the outside. Mostly from the Gulf. If historically it was Saudi and other Gulf countries, I would say at this point is Qatar and Turkey that are the two countries that fund this network. Now, what I like is, you might have picked up on the fact that I'm not a huge fan of the Brotherhood, but I do like to back up or have smarter people, other than the panelists, of course, say more or less the same things I would have said, but have more authoritative people saying. So we heard from the panelists. Different Western governments and how they assess the Brotherhood. This is from a wonderful exercise, at least in theory, that the British government conducted in 2014. It was the only government that ever did a government-wide review of the Muslim Brotherhood. Prime Minister David Cameron at the time understood that the Brotherhood was a big issue, one of his issues of strategic value, not just for the short term, but in the long term, sort of like communism in the 50s, that required the whole of government to come together and make an assessment of what is the Brotherhood, how it operates, whether in the UK or in the Middle East, and basically formulate a cohesive policy as to how the British government should engage or not engage and treat the Muslim Brotherhood, both domestically in the UK and abroad. And you can find, by the way, it's probably one of the very few public documents that are very somewhat sophisticated at the policy level. The executive summary is online. actual document is 250 pages, but it's classified. There's an executive summary, which you can find online, around 12 pages. And you can see the assessment is very negative. I wrote down a lot of these quotes because this is my second panel today. I know my voice was going to be tired, so I'm a bit lazy. And can you pass me the water? Thank you. Now, the Brits, but I would say there's a general tendency is that Anglo-Saxon countries, the UK, Canada, the US, have actually traditionally, historically, I'm simplifying things a lot. There's a great book written by Martin Frampton that talks about this, the softest on the Brotherhood. If we move to continental Europe, European countries have been significantly more pessimistic and negative about the Muslim Brotherhood, at least in their assessment. Then there's a big gap between assessment and policy, and I'll close with that without taking too much of your time. Dutch government, hardly a group of rabid Islamophobes. The Dutch were nice. I live in Amsterdam, so I gotta say it. Not all Muslim Brotherhood sympathizers are recognizable as such. They do not always reveal their religious loyalties and ultra-Orthodox agenda to outsiders. Apparently cooperative and moderate in their attitude to Western society. They have no violent intent. But they're trying to pave the way for ultra-Orthodox Islam to play a greater role in the Western world. It talks about the outreach, forging relations with relevant opinion leaders. Policy of engagement has been more noticeable in recent years, might possibly herald a certain liberalization of the movement's ideas, presents itself as a widely supported advocate and legitimate representative of the Islamic community. But, here's the kick, the ultimate aim, create, then implant and expand an ultra-Orthodox Muslim bloc, which is a legitimate goal per se. It's a problematic one. It's within the law. There's nothing wrong with that from a legal point of view. But it's not a black or white issue. It's not legal then or Austrian government. I'm going to cut this one fairly short. This is and actually a lot of his quotes, you can find them. There's been a lot of cases of people who ask for asylum in different European countries as Muslim Brotherhood members. And a lot of governments have to then decide whether membership in the Muslim Brotherhood, whether in a specific European country or in the Middle East, is something that is compatible with the values of that specific country. And the answer that comes from the Austrian government is a strong 9. Muslim Brotherhood does not maintain membership registers. Its members are kept secret in all countries to protect them from being identified by authorities. Nevertheless, there is an accurate set of rules. The Muslim Brotherhood, you can see it. But this is the best one. The political system aimed for is reminiscent of a totalitarian system, which guarantees neither the sovereignty of people nor the principles of freedom and equality. Such a fundamental position is incompatible with the legal and social norms of the Republic of Austria. And this is, the Liga Kulturverein is one of those brotherhood organizations which are not brotherhood organizations, these sort of second-tier groups. Finally, the best one. This is long, but the Germans are good. They're so precise and typical, and it's very... And this is from the Verfassungsschutzbericht, is the domestic intelligence agency from the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, which is the largest state in Germany and actually the hub of the Brotherhood in Germany. And that's every year they put out these reports, which are extremely German, meaning they're very precise and they give numbers of members, but also have a statement, have an assessment of these groups. Relatively small size, small number, but it's not obscure the fact that some of them have considerable influence. We talked about punching above their weight, overrepresentation. They can usually boast an academic education, so skills, are employed in well-paid and responsible occupation, and well-connected, both in Germany. So these are not your average immigrants struggling first generation. This is an elite group. Their goal is an Islamist society in which political interests are ultimately regulated according to religion. For this purpose, a strategy of Islamization from below is pursued. The individuals trained in this way should then work their way into society and make sure that in the long term it approaches the religious understanding of the Brotherhood. I know it's long, I'm sorry, but it's good. It's the last one, I promise. In recent years, local Muslim Brotherhood supporters have been able to use the public focus on jihadism and spectacularized and followed Islamic State to present themselves as a supposedly unproblematic alternative. This is what in social movement theory is called the radical flank effect. Once a more radical group comes up, it gives an opportunity for another group to say, look, we're the good guys, we're the moderates, which is what groups like the Brotherhood did 20 years ago with Al-Qaeda and the last few years with the Islamic State. We're not the bad guys. Look at these guys, they're beheading people. But the Germans do not fall for it. They're skeptical. I mean, go. The Muslim Brotherhood could thus become the representative of Muslims' interests in the state and society, German state, and elevate their understanding of religion within the Muslim community in Germany and North Rhine-Westphalia, and against state representatives to the standard of Islamic life. Such a development, them becoming the representatives of it, would be unacceptable to society as a whole and our democracy. An Islamist foreign organization would exert considerable influence with its politicized understanding of Islam in Germany, and thus jeopardize social cohesion and inner peace. So it's not necessarily a matter of terrorism. Often the debate is framed of the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization, then they're bad. They're not, then they're good. Well, it's slightly more complicated than that, and the Germans slice it pretty well. In the long run, promise the final, the threat posed by legalistic, that's what the Germans call it, the legalistic, meaning that they act within the law, Islamism to the liberal democratic system is greater than that of jihadism, which will always outnumber numerically. They aspire to an Islamist order, but are prepared to allow certain democratic elements within the framework. For this reason, extremism is often very recognizable at first glance. So those are the negative assessments that come from basically every single intelligence agency in the West, continental European agencies in particular. Now, as I said, there's a very, very big gap between the assessment that comes from the intelligence agencies and the policies that follow from policymakers, whether at the very bottom level, your local city council that has to work with Muslim organization to organize the iftar during Ramadan, or the very top level. And you don't have a single Western country that has a cohesive system of recognizing, assessing, and crafting a policy towards Brotherhood organization. I would say we're still at the stage that, with a lot of exceptions, of course, but many entities and individuals at the policy level, not just at the local level, but at the top, will not be able even to recognize Brotherhood organizations if they don't call themselves Muslim Brotherhood, which they don't. I'll leave it at that. I know I leave it to Magnus that talks about Sweden, which is a country that I think fares not greatly in terms of recognizing these things. So, thank you.